presented by Meetings Today with Sarah Solomon Dodden and Courtney Stanley. My name is Lori Tenney, Director of Strategic Content with Meetings Today, and I'm excited to welcome you to this webinar, one of the many that we offer. Our webinars cover a variety of topics that are important to the meetings industry, and we hope you'll join us for them all. We also offer a number of newsletters, including our Meetings Today News Update, the popular Meetings in a Minute Planner Tips, Newswire, Friday with Joan, and our more recent, the Hot List newsletter, and that's all in addition to our monthly magazine. Also be sure to check us out on the web at meetingstoday.com. We'd like to begin today with a brief polling question. A pop-up should appear on your screen momentarily, and it will read, "Please enter the number of people watching this event with you." So please make sure to include yourself. To answer the question, simply select your response and click Submit. Thank you. And today's webinar is worth 1 clock hour of credit in the human resources domains toward the CMP application through the EIC. To receive credit for attending this webinar, you must be present for the full hour. Upon completion of the webinar, you'll be taken to the related Meetings Today webinar club page to obtain your credit. We encourage you to ask questions during the presentation, and you may submit your questions at any time by typing them into the Ask a Question box below the speaker photo on the left-hand side of the slide deck, and then hitting Send. And should you experience any technical difficulties, please send a message in the Q&A area or call 800-553-8878. As always, we would like to thank our generous sponsors who make it possible for us to bring these events to you at no charge. Today, our appreciation goes out to our East sponsor, Providence Warwick CVB, our Mid-America sponsor, Grand Wayne Convention Center, and our West sponsor, Lake Tahoe Resort Hotel. And now I'd like to introduce today's speakers. Courtney Stanley is a motivational speaker, writer, and business strategist with a background in meeting design, community engagement, and leadership development. Courtney is the youngest member to have ever been elected to Meeting Professionals International's MPI International Board of Directors. She is the recipient of the Association for Women in Events Disruptor Award, the MPI Chairman's Award, and MPI Rise Award, named Collaborate and Connect Magazine's 40 Under 40, and recognized as one of the event industry's most impactful change makers. Courtney was recently tapped to serve a 2-year term on AWE's Board of Directors as well. And with over a decade of experience in production, Sarah Solomon Dodden brings her expertise into her own company, Solomon Productions, covering the meetings industry at large. In 2014, she won IAEE's Rookie of the Year Award. In 2016 and 17, Sarah worked hand-in-hand with the PCMA team as a co-host of PCMA's Convening Leaders Live broadcast. Currently, Sarah is the face and content creator of MPI TV and works with MPI's publication, The Meeting Professional, to produce year-round video content. Sarah is an MPI Rising Star Award winner and was recently named a finalist for the Emerging Leader Award through the Association for Women in Events. She serves on the Board of Directors as the VP of Marketing and Communication for the MPI Greater Orlando chapter, and also serves on the MPI Global Board of Trustees for a 2-year term. Courtney and Sarah were also recently named to co-chair for the first ever MPI Women's Advisory Board for a 1-year term. And meanwhile, Courtney and Sarah are co-founders of MeetingsToo, a social movement that empowers event professionals to prevent sexual harassment within the meetings and hospitality industry. And with all that, I would like to extend a warm welcome to our speakers and get started. Welcome, Sarah and Courtney.
Thank you so much, Lori. We appreciate that warm welcome, and we certainly appreciate all of you who are joining us on this webinar. Courtney and I have been tackling this movement that we labeled as #MeetingsToo for almost a year now. And it's really near and dear to our hearts. And a lot of people ask us, what makes you two credible? Why talk about this issue? Why disrupt the industry with this topic? And our answer to that is usually we've grown up in this industry. We have been victims of sexual harassment in our own ways. We have seen sexual harassment at various events, and in conversation, just through our friendship, we decided, we could either sit back and watch sexual harassment continue to be prevalent in our industry, or we could do something about it. And not just share stories, but really share some tangible, things that organizers can really walk away with and implement into their next meeting or event to prevent sexual harassment. So with that, I want to jump into a quick video to get us started.
Allegations by numerous women fired over accusations of sexual misconduct. Accusations of misconduct led to a suspension.
I feel so uncomfortable when he puts his hand on my lower back and lingers there. Is he just being friendly? Maybe I should watch to see if he does that to other women. Am I being paranoid?
I'd love to attend a conference and not feel like I'm being hit on for once. In an industry where I work with mostly women, sometimes I feel like I can't go to a networking event without dodging flirtatious advances.
Maybe he just had too much to drink. I mean, he wouldn't normally make a comment like that, would he? Am I making excuses for him?
There he goes again. This guy just cannot keep his hands off of women at conferences. Every year it's the same thing. Those poor women. Maybe this is just how it'll always be.
I actually chose not to go to the event because I knew he would be there. Another night of being stared at and touched inappropriately? No thanks. This is a big deal. This is a problem, and I've had enough. It's time to change things up. Me too.
Me too.
Meetings too.
So I'm sure many of you have experienced or even shared some of these phrases that you saw there in that video. And this is exactly why we wanted to take this initiative on, is to help prevent some of those phrases from ever becoming normal within our industry, at least moving forward. So what we're going to do on this webinar is break down preventative measures both before an event, what happens when a claim comes forward during an event, and then tackle, some of the repercussions that happened should you not take action following your event.
Let's dive into the official definition of sexual harassment. So you'll see the definition on your screen, and it says, harassment in a professional or social situation involving the making of unwanted sexual advances or obscene remarks. Although this is the technical definition of sexual harassment, many of us, and I'm sure many people listening in on this webinar, can agree with the idea that this sexual harassment is more of a spectrum. So there is a greatly vast variance between what may make one person feel uncomfortable and what one person may not consider uncomfortable. And that could be coming from the aggressor or the predator's perspective, or that could be coming from the person experiencing discomfort. So we want to back up a second, and we want to talk a little bit about the Me Too movement and where it all began. So for those of you who may not know the history of the Me Too movement, it was actually started a few years back, and it was reignited in the fall of 2017 when actress Alyssa Milano started a Twitter conversation by retweeting the message that you see on your screen, and she said,
If you've been sexually harassed or assaulted, write me too as a reply to this tweet. And she was referring to a friend of hers that had experienced sexual harassment or assault. And what happened was within the first 24 hours, as you saw in the video, 4.7 million people responded to that particular Twitter conversation using the hashtag #MeToo. And people quickly realized that this was not only an issue, but this was a societal challenge that needed serious attention to change this problem and change what is considered or has been considered normal for a very long time. Now, what is really interesting is specific to the meetings industry, thanks to PCMA. PCMA put out a survey following the Me Too online movement, and they asked people in their membership or in their community how many of their own community members experienced sexual harassment in a professional setting. And the results that came back may be shocking to some, but to others who have experienced sexual harassment as a knitting professional, it wasn't surprising at all. And what they found out was that 80% of the people who took the survey said yes, they have felt harassed or experienced sexual harassment or assault at a conference or a business event or in an office setting. And if we dig a little deeper into the survey that PCMA put out, we see that the majority of people did not report the incident with their human resources department or a manager or a trusted peer in a more senior position. And for those who did report, the 27% that said yes, they did report it, 73% said that it was not resolved. So here we see a couple of things happening. We see that one, sexual harassment is a huge issue within our industry specifically, and even more specifically at events. But two, most people do not feel comfortable sharing that an incident took place. So then we start to ask the question, okay, well, how do we make this easier for people to report if these things are happening? So we have a prevention issue, we have an awareness issue, and we have a challenge in front of us to effectively communicate to our attendees how to report an issue has occurred and to make sure that we're responsible for seeing that that incident is followed up with a proper, thorough investigation or action.
So I love this phrase or this sentence that Courtney actually termed a few months ago, actually I think about a year ago now, the imperfect storm. So she coined this as, you know, the mix of our industry where you've got an open bar at networking receptions, you are typically out of town, staying at hotels, and people tend to sometimes step outside of their character a little bit and do things that are just outside of the norm, right? And that's where the term the imperfect storm came from that Courtney labeled. So with that, we want to talk about how to prevent sexual harassment before you're meeting an event, knowing that you're walking into what could be an imperfect storm for some of your attendees, right? So of course we have to be realistic here and understand that we cannot control the behaviors of each and every person that attends our events. But what we can do is set them up with a series of mission statements, code of conduct, communication plans, you name it, to ensure that they understand where your organization stands, how you feel about sexual harassment, and that is a zero tolerance policy as an attendee of your event. So the first step is to, of course, solicit legal advice. A lot of folks ask us, you know, where do we get started? You always want to make sure you have an attorney on call, on hand, to just bounce ideas back and forth, help you create and craft that language around a code of conduct or a mission statement. And also this attorney should be there for you should a claim come forward during your event. So soliciting legal advice is always the first step to ensure that your preventative measures are effective, and also efficient, and of course legal, right? So the other part of it is creating the code of conduct. We have seen a lot of organizations put this into play, and that makes us really, really happy, because what we've been teaching and preaching and all of the above is working. Now, when we say code of conduct, we want to be really specific here. Make sure that you're using actual language that states sexual harassment. So it's not just code of conduct in general, but it really is specific to sexual harassment, sexual assault, and any kind of inappropriate behavior that would make another attendee feel uncomfortable. That code of conduct should live in your registration platform. So as attendees are going to register for your event, that code of conduct should be clear as day. They should read through it and then also be able to opt into it. The same way that they may opt into video or photography, release forms, if you will, through registration, this sexual harassment specific code of conduct should have that same kind of presence in your registration as well. So that's the code of conduct. Also, be sure to work, like I mentioned before, with your attorney to ensure that you're using the correct legal language to embed into this code of conduct.
Additionally, what's really great about having a code of conduct in place is that it provides leverage. So should an incident take place on site, it just gives you a little bit more leverage to be able to say, you know what, you signed this document, you agreed to the terms and conditions of how to behave on site, and now we have to take action. So setting yourself up to be able to take action before you're even on site is really, really critical. And that leads us to the importance of training your team. It's really important that your team feels equipped before they actually start beginning their work on site. And a lot of times that means providing your team with reactive training as well as proactive training. So something that we recommend is actually providing your team with a checklist of step-by-step actions for what to do should an incident occur. Moving into our point of contact, it's really critical that you assign somebody on your team, preferably someone who has a human resources role or a human resources background, to be able to be that designated person on site for attendees to contact, whether that be through a mobile app or whether that be at your help desk, or it could be somewhere else on site if you have a private room available.
Think of training your team and a point of contact as part of your contingency plan. So it's no different than if any emergency were to erupt on site at your event. I would hope that there is a designated person on your team that everyone knows to report to. So same thing with sexual harassment. Along with your point of contact, that individual should also be responsible for tracking social media posts. You know, a lot of times this happened at a recent event that I went to. Someone took their complaints to social media, and it was within the mobile app that people were just chatting back and forth about, the incident that took place the night before at a reception. So what's really dangerous there is if there is no one from your organization that is that designated point of contact, then unfortunately we have to, live with these negative comments and communications that are happening via social media and on your mobile app about this event. And there's no one there to respond. There's no one there to jump in from your team to say, whoa, what occurred here? I need to address this with the victim. I need to address this with, the person responsible for these actions and get to the bottom of it. So that point of contact is not necessarily just a reactionary person to claims that come forward, but think of this person as a watchdog, if you will, someone that can really track your social channels, your mobile app, and the communication that's happening online as well. So that moves into security. Along with a watchdog from your organization, we also recommend possibly adding an additional level of security. So actual human bodies that watch for inappropriate behavior, specifically at receptions. So these individuals would be responsible for, watching for people that look a little bit uncomfortable, or they see someone getting a little too close to another attendee, and the victim you could just feel their body language and can tell that they are not comfortable in that situation. So that's really what the security would be there for. Possibly adding additional cameras, working with the venue to see what security measures they have within their ballrooms, let's say, or what they can do to really play into adding more security at your event. So with that, we want to ask you, what would your team do? Do you have a current plan in place that if a claim were to come forward during your event, would your team scramble, or would you actually have all of these items in place and be able to seamlessly respond to the victim, work with the accuser, work with your attorney, put your code of conduct into play, put your checklist into play, so really start thinking about what your organization is currently doing versus not doing to ensure that there's a plan in place.
So now let's talk a little bit about how to take action if an incident does occur during your event and why it makes a big difference. As you saw in the survey that we showed earlier, the majority of people who did report incidents felt that the issue was not resolved. So we want to make sure that we encourage you to take action immediately. As soon as something is reported to your point of contact or to somebody on site, it's critical that you jump into action right away. That way the person feels like the issue is being taken seriously. The first thing that we would encourage you to do is to always show support for the victim. It's really, really critical that you provide a listening ear and make sure that you document everything that person is telling you. It's important to be asking open-ended questions to be able to give that person a chance to share their story without feeling like either you're not understanding or you're putting words in their mouth. So it's important to make sure that they're able to feel supported and to share their story without feeling judged.
So what happens when you neglect taking action when there is a claim that comes forward? So there's a series of things that could happen. And the first is your member and attendee retention. So as organizations, associations, you are the hub for members to look to you for education, for networking opportunities, you name it, in whatever industry that you're in. So when you don't take action, when you don't have a seamless plan in place to make a victim feel supported, we all know that word of mouth, and we've seen that come forward, especially with the MeetingsToo movement, word of mouth can really be damaging to an organization, to a company, to an individual. You don't want to fall victim to the damage that can come from neglecting to have a seamless plan of action in place for sexual harassment claims. We all rely on our members to keep our organizations living and breathing. So retention and your bottom line really matter when it comes to how you choose to handle claims of sexual harassment. In addition, credibility. So we talked about, the fact that your organization is looked to in your industry for education, for resources, white papers, you name it. I know I'm a member of several organizations, and I only pay my membership fee to credible associations, right? Associations that I know that I can rely on, trust, that really offer some valuable tools to help me advance both personally and professionally. So if I caught wind or heard of a situation where an association really didn't, handle a claim coming from another member or a colleague of mine, well, what would that do for me as, the way that I view the organization as a credible organization for my personal and professional growth. Probably pretty damaging, and probably, again, would affect my retention or my renewal of my membership to that organization. So these are the kinds of things that we want to prevent, and I don't think, as organizers, we really have to start looking at how not having a proper plan in place can affect our bottom line. Of course, this is the obvious one, and probably the one that we are all fearful of, lawsuits. So we want to, again, work with an attorney that is knowledgeable in sexual harassment claims, can open a review or an investigation and really speak to both the victim, the accuser, gather any evidence possible, and it's all in an effort to avoid a lawsuit. So the last thing you want on your hands is a victim coming forward, not feeling like they're safe and secure, but then also, going through something under your roof at your event, and then knowing or being able to tell that you don't really have an action plan in place. So this is how lawsuits occur, and it's all very avoidable should you have the right plan in place. I'll give you an example. I mentioned I'm a member of multiple organizations, but I actually experienced my own form of sexual harassment pretty recently. And I didn't want to, well, it's not that I didn't want to. I guess the more accurate term is I wasn't sure who to report it to within the organization. I didn't know if it was their problem, not their problem, if it was something that they would handle immediately, not handle immediately. I didn't want to feel embarrassed or feel like I was causing drama. But eventually this organization caught wind of my experience and what I was going through and who the accuser was. And they actually, took it to heart, opened a complete investigation, communicated with me right away, gave me a game plan, said, you know what, Sarah, within the next 48 hours, we will touch base with you. And here's what we are going to be working on over the next 2 days. We're going to be working with our attorney. We're collecting any evidence. And I just felt after that conversation, I just felt like, wow, this organization really does care about me as a member. I'm valuable to them. And they showcased that tremendously just through how effective and efficient their communication was with me following my incident. And I always say I will be a lifer of this organization because of what happened and how they handled the entire situation. So those are the kinds of stories that you want, victims to walk away with. You want them to feel like, wow, this association or this organization really had my back, and I too will be a lifer, and I will only speak positive about them because of, how they made me feel valuable. I know, Courtney, you have a story as well that was actually, I think, quite the opposite, right, comparing to my story. And do you want to talk about how that made you feel and kind of like the credibility of the company?
Absolutely, and I will fully acknowledge that they were having some audio issues, so I apologize for that, and I will try to be brief with my story. I actually had a situation where I was volunteering with an industry association, and I was sexually harassed and physically groped by another industry volunteer, and I did decide to push my fears of being shunned or being judged aside and report the incident to the people who could make a difference. And unfortunately, what happened right away was that the allegation wasn't taken seriously, and worse yet, it was actually brushed under the rug very intentionally. And for me, it just felt like such a slap in the face and so degrading to have actually had the courage to stand up and say something and try to make it right, especially for the women who would come after me in these volunteer roles. And eventually action was taken and the issue was resolved, but it took a lot of leaning on the support of other industry peers to help make my voice louder by being supportive of the story that I had to share. And this was just an internal matter. It wasn't anything that was publicly broadcasted, but even when it was resolved, because of how the issue was handled initially, it really turned me off to getting involved with this particular organization, and it fueled a passion for me to help other organizations understand the importance of taking these claims seriously and having a plan of action in place to make sure that the person feels like they've been heard and that actions have been taken, regardless of the results of any kind of investigation.
Yeah, and something else I want you all to think about and consider is, we live in a digital era. So sexual harassment, and I'm sure some of you have experienced this in your own lives, can come from social media. So let's take LinkedIn, for example. I have been harassed, awkwardly enough, via LinkedIn through LinkedIn messages. And some of the folks that have harassed me on social media are people that I met through a membership, right, through an organization's membership at their event. So at the end of the day, I will always classify those individuals with that organization because that is where I met these people. So although it's not necessarily sexual harassment that is happening on your watch, at your event, physically at your event, don't be surprised if you get a claim from a victim that says, hey, you know what, I met this person through your organization at your last event, and now this person is sending me really inappropriate messages through social media, and I really don't know what to do about it, but you're the only person that I knew to reach out to because I met this individual through your organization. So be sure that if you do get those claims, you also have something to say, right? A communication plan for those claims as well, because although, yes, it's not, something that you could control, it's outside of your event, it still falls back on your organization, and how you choose to respond and handle that claim will also reflect deeply on your organization. It's no different than what Courtney mentioned. She was volunteering for an organization. So she wasn't necessarily at an event when she was sexually harassed. She was volunteering on behalf of an organization. And it still was a poor reflection on the organization for how or the lack of action that they took in her case. Something that we wanted to just clarify, yes, actress Alyssa Milano didn't start the Me Too movement necessarily, but she did reignite it in 2017. So Tarana Burke, who's a social activist and just a rock star woman, is actually the person who started the Me Too movement in 2006. And her focus was really on children, African-American women who tend to be, unfortunately, victims of sexual harassment more than usual. So what actress Alyssa Milano did was she reignited the movement. Again, we just talked about digital and how effective social media can be. Well, that's why the Me Too movement sparked the way it did, is because it was on Twitter and ended up, in the hands of 4.7 million other retweets. And that's why we're here trying to find solutions around how we can prevent harassment from occurring in the future.
Okay, great. Go ahead, Courtney, sorry.
Yeah, no, this is Sarah. Just one other thing I wanted to share is, outside of just your code of conduct, outside of, your mission statement, outside of communicating with your member base or your attendees digitally or virtually, also maybe try to implement some language that you can work into your opening general session. So whether it's the president and CEO of your association that gets on stage to share this, or an MC, or sponsor, however you'd want to work it in, don't be afraid to say, our organization does not stand for sexual harassment. We have a zero tolerance policy, and here's the game plan should a claim come forward. I think it's time to be a little bit more bold in our words and actually using the term sexual harassment in person and not just in our codes of conduct or in email blasts and that kind of thing, but really bringing it to light on stage as well.
Okay, so we will now begin the Q&A session. Thank you so much for the informative presentation, Sarah and Courtney. You can submit your questions by typing in the Ask a Question box below the speaker photo on the left side of the slide deck and then hit send. So our first question is there a template that can be used for this topic on site to present to attendees? Sarah or Courtney, did you? Go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm trying to understand like a template for this topic on site. I think it's really just crafting a message, you know, again, at your opening general session or even within your mobile app. I think having some sort of template or checklist, you know, if you are a victim of sexual harassment, here's, you know, the next step of action. Here's your point of contact. You know, here's what we'll do next. I think that's the sort of template that you can maybe work into a mobile app or even, again, present on stage, put it on a PowerPoint slide so people can see it loud and clear. So that would be my suggestion as far as incorporating some kind of template into your event for attendees.
Okay, great. Let's see, next question. Is it legal to give out attendee participation listings? And if so, what happens when you get a call that a perpetrator of another attendee will be in attendance?
So this kind of, I think, goes into the GDPR concerns. If you get a call that a perpetrator of another attendee will be in attendance, I think it's up to your organization to have a conversation, a personal conversation with that person, and ensure that the perpetrator is well informed that, you know, what your organization stands for, and that if any claims come forward, you know, he or she will be removed or taken out of your event. So I think it's a little bit difficult to speak on the legal side, which is why we always say, you know, seek legal counsel, especially an attorney that is well-versed in sexual harassment. But I wouldn't advise necessarily giving out an attendee participation list. I think then we kind of dive into a whole nother realm of legal issues, like I mentioned, especially with GDPR concerns. But I think it's all in how you try to approach a situation or a perpetrator prior to an event. I'll give you an example. So the perpetrator that I just shared my story about a few minutes ago, I ran into at another conference for another organization, which of course was very awkward, and I felt, you know, I immediately felt disgusted, and, you know, but I also knew that it's not necessarily this organization's problem, if you will, to take this person out because he wasn't a perpetrator under their watch. So you also have to be a little bit realistic, and, you know, I think through due process and in the land of giving people second chances, you know, you have to open your arms to all of your attendees and participants. But I think if you want to take action beforehand, it's really having a conversation with who you know to be a perpetrator or someone that has committed, you know, inappropriate behaviors in the past at other events outside of your organization, if you wanted to take that route.
Okay, and the same person was saying that their company has a declaration. We move to go directly to the attendee's HR to handle it. If it is going on in a conference, the possibility is high that it is happening in the office space, they say.
Yeah, and that's completely true. I think that's a very fair statement. I mean, it's never an isolated incident. So when, unfortunately, people have a history of sexually harassing individuals, it's not just happening at your event, it is probably happening internally as well. Working with that individual's HR company to ensure that, you know, your concerns are heard and met, and maybe they can open a review process or an investigation of some sort is definitely an appropriate way of handling it. And thank you for sharing that with us.
Okay, great. You may have covered this in the first question, but someone is also asking about a checklist, a template for the checklist that they could use at events, where they might be able to find that.
Sure. So what we can do is we're happy to email a checklist out should anyone be interested, and have a deeper conversation about, you know, creating the code of conduct and mission statement and all of that go into your checklist. So Courtney and I are actually working with several different organizations on creating some of these line items for them. So if you are interested in a checklist, please feel free to reach out to us post-webinar, and we're happy to share that information with you.
Okay, perfect. We can also post it on meetingstoday.com as well. So also, there's another question. One of the biggest challenges of our organization is having to find a good solution for legal counsel. Fees associated with following through on claims are very high. Do you have any advice on the best way to execute the code of conduct process while managing a modest budget?
My advice would be to check in with other associations and what they have done to implement their code of conduct. It's okay to copy, right, if you will, and make the language your own for your own organization. But if seeking legal counsel is just out of budget and unrealistic for your organization, there are many other ways to still create a code of conduct that is effective and will do the trick. And this is how Courtney and I also work with organizations, is to come up with that language. We've actually partnered with someone an attorney who specializes in sexual harassment, and have had a lot of great advice from her on how to piecemeal some code of conduct and stuff together as well. So although we are not attorneys, we can play one on TV for sure and create a code of conduct that is going to be effective and get the message across to your attendees.
Okay, great. And someone else was just pointing out here that it should be distinguished between an accused perpetrator and a convicted perpetrator.
Absolutely, yes. You know, and something else that I want to bring to light here, I think, you know, a lot of people say, well, sometimes, you know, like people engage in inappropriate behavior together. Yes, like that is consensual behavior. That is not what the MeToo movement nor the MeetingsToo movement is about. It really is just about, you know, when a perpetrator or when a victim makes a claim, and making sure that the perpetrator has a fair trial, for lack of a better word, right? Due process needs to come into play here. And there is a huge difference between someone who's actually convicted versus someone who is just being accused of something. And sometimes there are false claims. You know, unfortunately, we have to be honest about that. Sometimes false claims do come to fruition, and that's why making sure that you have all of your facts straight and collecting every ounce of evidence that you can, whether it's text messages or, you know, messages on social media, or if there are witnesses that saw something at a reception take place, all of that plays into the investigation or the review process. So we do have to be very careful how we label a perpetrator, because this is very sensitive stuff that we're talking about. And the last thing you want to do is damage someone's reputation who, you know, is not necessarily accused just yet or convicted just yet. So we want to, you know, walk that line really, really carefully, because there is a huge difference between the two.
Right. Someone else is saying here that in their organization, they actually have mandatory training by their QA department on what is appropriate and not appropriate workplace behavior and what the definitions of harassment are as a minimum. And the training is mandatory for anyone who starts work in their organization, and it's checked and tested by QA and management if everything is understood. So they just wanted to point that out, and also that that way you can avoid misunderstandings, and the onus is not on the target to defend themselves. The person should have known better since they were trained.
I love that. I think implementing training specifically on sexual harassment kind of goes to our point about training your team in general. So that training of your team is not just necessarily for what could occur at your event, but it's also internal training for your team to understand that, you know, this is not acceptable within our office either. So yeah, training people. And the other thing we have to keep in mind is sexual harassment means something so different to all of us. So from, you know, our various cultural beliefs, religious beliefs, you name it. You know, Courtney may get offended if someone puts their arm on her shoulder, whereas I may not really care, right? So, and I'm not saying that is sexual harassment, but I'm just giving you an example to make you understand that it means something so different to everybody. So back to the investigation, this is why it's so important to really understand the scenario, how things played out. If this person is also, you know, making others feel uncomfortable, if there is a behavioral problem, you know, that is reoccurring, then most likely we have a problem on our hands. But if, you know, my religious beliefs are that, you know, if you hug me, I consider that a form of harassment, which some, you know, religions do believe that, then it's up to you as an organizer to say, okay, well, you know, this was maybe just a misunderstanding, and we can't really classify this as a sexual harassment claim, right? So, but that all is helpful to know through training processes that happen both internally with your team to understand sexual harassment as a whole, but then also how they handle sexual harassment for your members and attendees as well.
Right. So someone else is asking, is there a group or organization you'd recommend to serve as a third party on investigating claims that are put forward, since attorney fees add up and they want to ensure they budget enough money for potential claims and follow through accordingly?
You know, there is actually a third party, and I'm so sorry, their name escapes me at the moment, but I can also get that information to maybe you, Lori, and maybe in a follow-up meetings today can send out that information. But yes, they do assist with claims that come forward, and they are a third party. Now, I can't speak to their pricing and what that looks like. I don't know how comparable it is to working with an attorney per se, but I'm happy to provide that information, and maybe, you know, you can do some research from there.
Sarah, I can jump in really quick. This is Courtney, and hopefully no audio issues. There is actually a third-party reporting and documentation tool that Meeting Professionals International started using last year. It's the NAVEX Global's Ethics Point System. And like Sarah mentioned, we can absolutely follow up with a little bit more information, but essentially it is it's a great way for people who are attending MPI conferences to be able to report an incident that happened on site at an event or as a volunteer. And then MPI is able to review the investigative questions and documentation that this third-party system essentially organized and managed. So again, that is the NAVEX, NAVEX, NAVEX Global's Ethics Point System.
Thank you, Courtney. That is exactly who I was thinking of, and their name escaped me. So yes, and like Courtney said, we can include some more information on NAVEX in a follow-up email.
And just a couple other comments that people had. Someone was saying that one definition of sexual harassment I've heard and use is If it is not part of the organization, then it can be considered harassment. If you work in an accounting firm, any touch or sexual wording can be harassment since it's not part of the business, etc. Just a comment somebody had.
Yeah, and people have various definitions of sexual harassment, but I think at the end of the day, if someone, touches you inappropriately or sends you inappropriate photos, or really makes you feel just if someone's being a creep, let's call it what it is. If someone's being a creep, and it's not something that you asked for, then yeah, it's considered sexual harassment. Regardless of what industry, whether it's in business or accounting or events or cosmetics or, whatever industry we're in. We've seen it in Hollywood. We've seen it on, TV. We've seen it in companies. It's just unfortunately something that is everywhere. And it's just the stories that we're hearing are, people are more comfortable sharing some of the experiences that they've gone through. And again, some people may hear stories and think, whoa, that's not sexual harassment, but it means something so different to each one of us individually. So yeah, the definition can really vary.
Right, and I think it's also important just to reiterate that it also includes men.
Absolutely. Through this experience, Courtney and I have surprisingly have heard stories from several men that have come forward and talked to us privately and shared some of their stories. And yes, this is a human problem. That's another important thing that we always share is, this is not a man-bashing party. The Me Too movement is not necessarily a movement that is meant to ruin the lives of men, right? But it's more so a human problem. Men get harassed by women quite often as well at events. I have seen it with my own eyes. So this is really a social problem, and that's why we say it's a social problem, because it affects men and women equally.
Right, exactly. Okay, just one other comment that was interesting. Someone here is saying they're an international organization with their headquarters in the U.S. and offices in Europe, China, India, and Brazil. So we have a wide range of staff members, but it's important that we're all on the same page on what is acceptable and not acceptable, and to find that common denominator. We also have very strict rules on any kind of discrimination based on religion, sex, gender, skin color, gender self-identification, political views, age, etc.
I love that. And yeah, that should speak, those should really speak across borders, regardless of where you have employees or where your attendees come from. A lot of us organize international events, so you do have people from all over the world with various cultural practices and religious beliefs. So yes, your code of conduct and how you position your organization is across borders. This isn't just a U.S.-based, language. It should really speak to humans in general. One thing I did want to encourage you to do is, if you're interested in hearing from a really powerful man in our industry, Michael Massari, the Chief Sales Officer for Caesars Entertainment, Courtney, Lori, and myself actually had a really, really great and insightful podcast on MeetingsToday.com with Mike Massari, and he really gave us his perspective and his take on sexual harassment. Him being a man of influence in our industry who manages and works with women, who has to manage women who work with male clients quite often. Just hearing his take on how he sees sexual harassment, but also the Me Too movement as a whole and the MeetingsToo movement as a whole is really interesting. So that is one podcast I encourage you to listen to on the Meetings Today website. And then also there's another podcast. It's more of a storytelling podcast with Fiona Pelham and another woman, Miriam, and Courtney and Lori, who all kind of sat together and really became vulnerable on this podcast and shared some of their stories and really, how the Me Too movement has empowered them to speak out and why the Me Too movement has really ignited the kind of conversations that we're having even here right now. So that is another really great podcast I really recommend you listen to, also on the Meetings Today website.
Excellent. Also, I would recommend, if anybody hasn't seen it, to check out our October issue of Meetings Today. If you didn't get it in print, you can see the digital version on our website. But Sarah and Courtney graced the cover of that publication, and it's all about them sparking the MeetingsToo movement to address and combat sexual harassment in our industry. So I think that is it for the questions. And let's see, as we close out the presentation, there are just a few important pieces of info we'd like to share. Be sure to join us next week, January 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern, as Terry Wooden presents Ways to Save, Maximizing Your Meetings Budget. So we hope you can join us for that. Also available on our website, you can find a vault of information on past webinars available for you to view at any time at your convenience. You can visit meetingstoday.com/webinar to learn more about these events, or click on-demand webinars and watch now. Once again, we would like to thank our generous sponsors who make it possible for us to bring these events to you at no charge. So thanks today to Providence Warwick CVB, Grand Wayne Convention Center, and Lake Tahoe Resort Hotel. Upon completion of this webinar, you will be redirected to today's related webinar club page. Each webinar has its own unique webinar club page where you can download the presentation, view the webinar on demand, obtain your CMP credit certificate, and so much more. Today's webinar club page is at meetingstoday.com/webinar club sexual harassment. If you're not automatically redirected, you may also visit our website, meetingstoday.com, and hover over the Webinars tab in the navigation and click on Webinar Club in the drop-down menu. So thanks again to Sarah and Courtney for this very enlightening presentation, and please stay tuned for follow-up stories and other content related to MeetingsToo and sexual harassment in the industry. And thanks to all of you for joining us for this webinar. Have a great day, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you.